Hey, Sam, you come up with that intro line?
You didn't tell me that was today.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Writers Room with Sam and Jim. This is the show where we bring aspiring writers into our writers' room to help them work on and develop their story. And we're going to do that with J. Hunter Richardson in just a couple minutes here. But first, I want to go off about something. Sam, brace yourself. Here it comes. What I've been thinking about is perspective. We're in a job that very few people have, and it's really hard to get into. And the thing that I think people lose sometimes in this job is perspective, right? Mm-hmm. There's parts of this job that you think look pretty easy from the outside. Well, you go to a writer's room and you hang around for 8 or 9 hours a day, and somebody feeds you lunch, and you have assistants running around doing stuff, and poor production assistants who are probably overpaid doing their thing.
Yeah, overpaid.
Overpaid,
Uh-huh.
right. But, and it looks pretty posh from the outside, I think. And then you get on the inside of it, and you start giving up weekends, you start giving up nights, you begin to realize what a slog it can be and how hard it is to put in the mental work for 8, 9, or 14 hours a day, depending on what you're doing.
Well, sometimes you drop the bucket into the well and there's just no water, man. I mean, you've been drawing off of that for day after day after day. And by the way, if you come up with 13 episodes in a season, say, that means you've probably thought of or written about 70, right, in some version, because you've pitched this and pitched that and new versions and all of that. So you can get pretty dry.
And that can be a real grind. And then you remember what it's like to have a real job.
That's right.
Right.
And thank God we did.
And thank God we did, because I see people who get into that position, and it's easy. We all do it, right? We fall in this trap of feeling like, oh my God, I'm so beat up by this job and I can't take it. But then you remember what it's like to work for much less money, much longer hours, often in jobs that have much less gratitude or cachet, right?
Well, I mean, we had restaurants, and we would work in restaurants, and sometimes we'd get in there at 7 or 8 in the morning. We wouldn't leave until 1 in the morning. And in that time, you get to be the cool owner walking around for about 10% of the time. And the other time, you're busting tables, the dishwasher's broken and you're underneath it and you're fixing it, or you're plunging the toilet because you can't afford to send the dishwasher back there because you need him, because you need more dishes because you got to keep the thing running.
Yeah, he's actually more important to the running of the business than you are.
And you get stamina, and it's a whole different deal. So when you're people, and we've seen it. We've seen, I know senior writers who just have a weariness about them, about what they have to do. And I understand it, because it gets pretty tiring. But I also feel like if they had a full career, or at least had done something for a stretch before that, not just odd jobs, but something that mattered to them, and saw how hard it was. And then, of course, when it was our own business, we never knew what we were going to get paid. So all of a sudden, well, that's kind of in common with this one. Now that I think about it. But I have to say, in those moments, I'm grateful for that, because it gives us ballast. It gives us bearing.
Right. It gives you a little perspective on what you're doing and how appreciative you should really be that we managed to make it this far.
Having said that, where the hell is lunch?
JR! Okay, let's get into this week's show. Jay, this is Jim. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys. This is very exciting.
This is Sam, and we are thrilled to have you. In no small part for the fact that we read on your little bio that you actually started out in the 2008 script. What was it? The writer's strike.
Oh,
and you got boned. And I want to hear about you getting boned.
Because we got boned too.
Yeah.
I would imagine. It's like my villain. It's like my super villain origin story. So it's funny because I always wanted to be in film, and at the time I didn't really know that I wanted to write. So I went to film school. I went through the whole thing over at CSUN. It was really great. I decided I was going to go into sound because I had like a music background. So I went through the whole course. I ended up writing a lot of the scripts we ended up working on, and I found myself doing like rewrites for the other, projects that we were doing. And, at the time, it's like in my head, I'm like, oh, I can just help them out with this. Never considered myself a writer, or even it wasn't even a thing in my mind. So when I finally graduated, I ended up getting an internship in the last semester with Sony Pictures. Very exciting. I went through the whole thing. I think I worked on Spider-Man 3 and Surf's Up, that Penguin movie. Those are the two big movies that we were there. So I'm at Sony when like the Spider-Man, like when it like set records when it was released. So like everyone's feeling good, vibes
This is
are
a
high.
very high. Uh-oh.
Yes.
Which is always right before. Go ahead.
I think they gave everyone free ice cream on the lot that day, so it was like the best.
That had to be the best year ever because studios never give away anything for free if they give away.
Exactly. So I got hired. They hired me on a Monday. It was great. I was super excited. They had this whole slate board of all the films they were going to be working on and everything. And on that, I think it was Wednesday, I came in, I skipped Tuesday, I walk in on Wednesday, and the entire slate board is totally erased.
Oh.
And they have nothing. And my boss took me in, and he's like, listen, I know that we just said we had a job for you, but we don't.
Oh,
and
man.
that just continued for another year of literally calling. At first, it was calling every week, and then every other week, and then a couple months, and then eventually it was just like, listen, I got to give these jobs to guys who have been doing it for a long time. They have families.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I just can't help you anymore.
Yeah.
And, it sucks because, like, I pretty much put my whole life on hold for a year waiting for jobs and just trying to make money where I could. And it kind of fell apart. I tried again, like a little bit later, doing a bunch of indie films, and things kind of just never really picked up. And it wasn't until later that I was like, you know what, I'm going to give this whole writing thing another shot. And I took some classes, and the teacher at the end of it told me that I should probably not be a writer because I wasn't very good at it. So it was kind of a blow then.
I think I had that teacher.
Yeah, he said all of my writing is too much like an O. Henry novel, which I had no idea what that meant at the time. But what he was trying to say is that I write too many twist endings, and it was kind of genre heavy and stuff.
Right.
Which, isn't a bad thing, but it kind of bummed me out, and I took some time off from writing after that.
Well, Jay, let me pause you for a second. First of all, I feel your pain. We have been there. I think we talked about this in the little origin story, but we turned in our pilot to ABC and then went on strike and picketed in front of the building where we're sitting there, right? So we've been there, and I feel you. And at that point, I did have a family. I had at least one kid, and Jim did too.
That was a lean year and a half while the strike went down, and then the aftermath, because everything was just a mess. It was shattered, broken on the floor. Like, how do you start up again?
I feel like we could talk about this. A bunch of writers talking about that period is like old people getting together, talking about all their medical ailments, all one-upping each other. Because one person will be like, look, I just got my first job, dead. Then we could say, we just sold this pilot and we turned it in and we were so excited, dead. And then you could have a showrunner saying, I just signed a $4 million overall deal, dead. I mean, you pick your pain. It's all pain. Yeah. Writer's pain. Jim gave me a bottle of scotch of whiskey the other day. It's called Writer's Tears.
Ooh, yeah. That would have been. That's probably. You know what? It's the timeline kind of adds up. That's probably right when they were starting to distill it. Was back then, man.
Right. It's less bitter than you would think.
You provide your own bitterness, but I feel your pain. And then the teacher telling you that you suck. That's really a capper. I haven't had a teacher be direct about it that way, and she's never. The teacher I'm thinking about, the Jim and I took, she didn't say we specifically suck. She said, I don't know why anybody is trying to do this job right now. And that was like 99 at UCLA. Yeah. And there were no jobs because cable hadn't started up really TV yet. The Sopranos were about to come out. It took a while. So, yeah, this is a period of struggle. Struggle makes us better, bald, and bitter.
Gives you something to write about.
And it gives us something to write about.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I feel like given the timeline and everything, like I'm definitely better now. But it was one of those things where like I feel like I did lose a lot of time and motivation. It was those two back-to-back events that kind of set me back a bit. But I eventually took it back up. I wrote a story for like an NPR contest. They had a 3-minute fiction contest, and they ended up publishing my story on.
Nice.
And they read it online and stuff. And I was like, oh, okay. Maybe I can do this. And, I decided to take it back up. I started taking classes at UCLA Extension. And honestly, it's like my favorite thing. It's the best hobby I've got. And I've got a lot of hobbies.
Well, there's something to be said for maturity, too. Like when you're writing stories just out of, you can fall into that O. Henry mode because you're just sort of making stuff up out of thin air. But the older you get, the more mature you get, I think you begin to resonate with characters because you've been through some stuff yourself and you start feeling it more. And it changes your stories. They get more emotional, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Right. And, this goes into Jim and I when we were starting out. When I was trying to talk him into opening a restaurant with me, which was right when we graduated from college. I said, dude, we're 22 years old, man. What are we going to write about? Yeah, we can make up a bunch of stuff, but we didn't really know anything. And now that I'm a lot older than 22, I'm like, I was right. We didn't know nothing.
Right.
And as far as that, maybe there are 22-year-olds out there that have a world of experience, or maybe they're just brilliant writers and they are so empathetic. But I think you need some miles.
Seasoning.
Yeah, to write, especially drama. Because you're not just, not that comedy's easy. Of course it isn't. But I just mean you have to meet people. And what I told Jim was we're going to meet 1 million people. We're going to have all these experiences. And then we can reference that. And it worked. There are a lot easier ways to do that than open a fucking restaurant.
That's definitely true.
But it worked for us. And it took some time. We had a lot of experiences, and we still to this day reference people that we met in that life when we are creating characters. And which is why creating characters for us it's fun, and it's not easy. They're never easy, but they come. And that O. Henry stuff, I think that the teacher was telling you was just about plot, which is the number one thing to me. Aspiring or younger writers, that's what you read. And they're so excited by their plot, and you have to figure out a nice way to say, I'm not really connecting. I'm not,
Yeah, and learning that an emotional turn is just as valid as a plot turn.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
In a story.
It took me a long time to figure that out. As he was just saying, I'm writing stories for the story's sake, and there's no connective material. There's nobody to kind of latch on.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, he probably could have voiced it a little bit better at the time, but I understand his intentions now, and it took me a couple of years to figure it out and really dive into it,
Man, that's you're much nicer about it than I would be. Here you are. Every writer is sensitive, and then you've got your teacher, and they're kicking you in the nuts right as you walk out the door. That's nice.
Yeah.
But so you dove back in. You've got a story you want to tell us about. What is it?
So I've been writing for a while, and I do a lot of character stuff. And again, probably because of that teacher, I started focusing more on the characters and less on the stories. But today, I am actually diving back into what I shouldn't be doing, and I have a story that has good. It's kind of like one of those high-level sci-fi things, but where I'm struggling is actually with the connective tissue, with the characters and their actual motivations within it. That's why I'm hoping you guys can help me out, because I've actually fallen into my old, the old trap that I used to, really struggle with. So I'm hoping you guys can give me a hand with it.
Sure. Pitch it. What you got?
All right. So the idea, it's a sci-fi 1 hour drama. It's going to be Highlander meets Sliders. Do you guys remember Highlander and Sliders, like the TV shows, not
Definitely.
the movies from the 90s?
Definitely. Both of them.
Vaguely Sliders. Highlander, I think, is imprinted in my DNA at this point.
And Highlander, just to look back, one of the worst movies ever that I completely loved and watched all of them.
One of the tragedies of COVID is that the remake got stalled. Like, I'm waiting for they were shooting it, I think, and now it's.
I just, I wanted to write something that was in that realm of kind of weird science fiction, episodic stuff. So I came up with an idea called Singular. And so the log line is, after losing her best friend and mother only a few days apart, a young woman's whole universe comes crashing down around her. But luckily, she finds out soon enough that she is uniquely capable of slipping into an alternative one. So the idea is it's like a top-down multiverse story.
So I want to ask a couple genre questions, and then let's get into the character. So you say when you say her universe comes down around her, that's funny because that as an expression, but that goes right. So how do you mean that?
In genre, that could literally mean anything from the universe collapses into a singularity to she can't make coffee anymore.
Exactly.
Exactly. So in this manner, I actually mean in like a personal note. As her personal life is coming down around her, she feels very alone. Right. But I wrote it like that because it is, on the whole, it's a sci-fi thing of, the universe is changing and on a whole, everything can be different. The idea that everything is based on is the multiverse is represented by like spokes on a wheel, like a bike wheel with a bunch of different spokes. And each spoke is an alternative or an alternate universe that differs slightly from the one next to it.
Right.
And the further you go out, the more different these realities are.
Right.
At the center of it is a hub, but like the hub is going to come in like way later, not too important. The idea is that all of these spokes are connected in a way, but they're also separated. And the only thing stopping you from slipping into one of these alternate realities is the copy of you in that other place. So kind of like two magnets similarly charged, how they repel. You can't go into another alternative universe if you're already in there.
Well, hold on a second. Hold on a second.
Wait, well, step at a time here.
Slow it down. All right.
I'm going to slow you down. Only because, first of all, bullshit. Meaning this. You're right. You can make that as a rule.
Yeah.
But absolutely 100%. But it doesn't have to be that rule. That's up to you. You're the god here.
And you make the rule for as long as it services you to have that rule, and then you break the rule.
Well, you can break the rule and then explain why you broke the rule, or explain how that works in your world. But I just want to say, and I've been to a lot of Comic-Cons. Jim practically speaks Elvish because he's a Lord of the Rings fanatic nerd. But the thing about it is, we all make the rules. When Jim and I sit down and rewrite genre, we talk about the rules, but we know fully well that we're making shit up. And that if a rule doesn't work for us, we can drop it. So when you say you can't exist in this other thing, I'm just going to ask, does that create a good kind of problem where you have to figure out clever ways around it? Or does it create a problem where your lead is not able to go into some places because he's already there or she's already there?
Well, that's actually what makes her so special is she's the singular person in that whole multiverse. So she can actually go anywhere because she's the only person that exists there. And it kind of plays into the entire motive for what your big bad is going to be. So the idea is that her in the pilot, she loses her best friend early on to a rare cancer. And then her mother is murdered by this mysterious masked man. And halfway, after the funeral, she kind of feels like her best friend is always, watching her, and she sees her in all these places. And then her best friend shows up right after the murder. Only it's not her best friend because this is science fiction.
Someone from the multiverse. Okay.
Of course it is. Of course it is. And this person explains to her, like, listen, your mother was killed by this guy who's going to different multiverses, and he keeps killing, like, the same specific person, which is your mother. So the idea is there's this group of villains.
Okay, hold on. Hold on.
Slow it down.
Yeah, no, it's a lot. And Jim, for everyone, for the people who are listening to this thing, it's a lot to absorb. Even though Jim and I are going with you because we're just as big of dorks
we walk these roads with some regularity.
Yeah, we talk about this stuff. So the first thing is, all right, the great thing is we are in her point of view. And what's her name, by the way? What's the lead's name? Sarah. So we're in Sarah's point of view. Right? She doesn't know what the hell is going on, and that's great because that's how we're going to learn what's going on.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I will point out to you that you nested several ideas in one, just as an example. And this is where when we tease out that we can only get like one piece of big information at a time. Right. Somebody cannot come into a scene and say, here's everything that's going on. Not only is it almost impossible to understand, even though the words will be there. And sometimes someone will read a scene and they'll have a note, even though the words are actually there. And Jim and I will be confused because you'll think, well, it says it right there. But then we get into discussions of, but did it land? Does it have value? Just because people say words, when, was there a reaction from the character, something that made it stick?
And that goes to this thing you're looking for of the connection between the characters, the emotional bit. There's her best friend showing up that has impact all on its own. And her best friend can walk up to her and say one thing, the bad version is, I'm from another dimension. What? Yeah. Cut to, there's someplace else, right? And you can build a series of scenes where you're getting the different pieces that you want as they try to unravel what's happening.
Right.
That have their own emotional content, their own drive, their own, maybe this guy's chasing them, whatever it is. But instead of it being an info dump where in one scene someone's trying to give you, 10 rules, you can space it out a little bit.
And when I was talking about nesting, Jim pointed out rightly, one of the things is there is a multiverse. That's huge. The second one is there's a person going through the multiverse killing people. I don't think we can have those in the same, I don't know if we can have them in the same act, but we definitely can't have them in the same scene. Right.
Well, and then you have a friend who's able to move between multiverses.
Well, that's another one, right?
Somehow.
Yeah. So
how did you get here?
So I know you want to get to the end so we can hear everything and then talk about it. And I'm going to tell you right now, we're not going to get to the end and we're not going to hear everything because I think the answers are actually in the discussion of these moments. Although I'm going to ask you the ending in a minute, but here's why. First of all, there is a multiverse. Why is this the worst thing that could happen to get to the character. And we're trying to figure out Sarah, what she's like. Why is this the worst thing that could happen to Sarah? That's what I want to know. For example, one type of person, this is where a starting point where I would pitch to Jim and then we would start spinning on, or Jim would pitch to me, is in a universe where there are many universes, the person who that is the worst thing for is someone who's agoraphobic. For example, they don't want to leave their own house, let alone the infinite possibilities of houses in the universe.
I'd start a level below that, which is for someone who just lost their parent.
Yeah.
The worst thing to happen is to find out that your parent is out there in a trillion other copies, and you could go to some other universe and get them back.
That's the best thing that could happen to them.
No, it's the worst thing because it's not real, right? Like
why is it not real?
Well, it's not actually her. There's going to be a difference, right? There's going to be differences between these people in all these different universes.
Well, hold on. Now I think you're nesting, because the first reaction to is your mother does exist in another universe is the win. And then finding her and seeing that she's different is the loss.
I guess as it happens, I'm reading a book where this is part of the story right now called Burn. It's a really good YA novel.
I thought you were about to say, as it happens, this happened to me.
As it happens, the Sam in the other universe, I like him much better. But it's one of those things, like, it's the classic multiverse story is the people you think you know and love in the other multiverse are not the same as the people you know and love here. Right? That's the tragedy of the story, but sometimes it's the hopeful piece.
But that didn't tell me anything about her character yet. So how do we get character out of that truth, Jim? or Jay?
I guess I'm not thinking about character. I was thinking about emotion. I'm trying to add that piece to the story, which is just what are the emotional bells that we're ringing, and the having lost someone and having the chance to get them back. It feels like a core piece of the story.
Yeah.
Right. So I mean that's what I'm going for with the motivation, is that her motivation to join this journey is guided by the fact that she thinks she can recapture her old life, her old best friend and her mother, and start over. But in reality, like as you were stating, this is all different. This isn't actually nothing will ever be the same. Even though it seems like she can recapture it, it's gone. Her universe is gone as she knows it.
Right. But although the question is going to be, are these mothers maybe a little bit enough for her, even for an afternoon? And these are all questions. I don't want to address them. What I want to say is the idea that she's lost her mother and she's devastated would happen to will happen to everybody. Ideally, you'll outlive your mother. So the question is, what is her specific reaction to that experience? And how does that define her? Because the death of the mother is external. How she deals with it is internal. And it'll make it so much easier to write. And there's a couple rules, not rules, but tools that we use, which is, first of all, what's she like when you meet her at a party, right? Because that'll give you just a sort of a cursory top-level impression, so you'll get that. And then also, how does she react to that? Who is she?
Well, and then there's the one level beyond that, too, which is ideally at the end of the story, there's something innate to her that relates to the world of your story, right? Like, this person is part of this world, and you're being exposed to the story through them because in some way there's a piece of their character, how they approach the world, some truth about them that is a counterpoint to or that plays well with the truth you're trying to tell in the larger arc of the story.
Right.
Right.
And if I could simplify that just a little bit, first of all, they do that in every damn terrible movie. The reason why this character...
heavy-handed bad way.
Overly simplistic way is, oh my God, this guy's father did this horrible thing, and now he is the one that has to redeem it. Okay, that's not a bad idea, by the way, but then the application, that's overly simplistic, and then they don't spend the time to like get any nuance and work it. Something that would be really specific, that would be an example. This is WandaVision, right? That just wrapped up a few weeks ago. But it is, and I don't want to give anything away, but this is a woman dealing with intense pain and loss that happens to have telepathic and can do all the things if you ever read the books. And what does that woman do with her pain and loss? And she does something that only she can do.
And they brilliantly transformed that, because I remember I read some of those the comics of the House of M, how they did it in the Marvel world originally, and it was just a brilliant adaptation of that idea and translation to a TV show.
You see what I'm saying, Jay? About and even though in that version they made different TV shows of different genres, different periods, and that was visually interesting and cool. It all comes down to that was gravy. What the core of it is her pain and her ability to create a world where she didn't have to live that pain anymore. So what is Sarah doing? What is her thing? And that's the question. Just keep drilling back to that. Because once we find out why this is the worst thing in the world for her, then there's conflict in every scene. And she's struggling in every scene, and those are much more fun to write and a heck of a lot more fun to read.
I mean, that's kind of the thing. Is like, if one of you had mentioned earlier, like, what if she's an introvert? The way that I kind of pictured it is like she is very much an introvert because of these abilities she doesn't know that she has. She sees everybody kind of in a different light, as you know, most people do, and this has caused her to kind of draw back into herself. So, you know, her whole world was her mother and her best friend, and the biggest fear for her would be having to start over and build new relationships. So in the story, the whole thing is like she's being forced to not only confront, like, you know, leaving her house, but she has to leave literally everything she knows. And she's constantly tempted by falling back into this, you know, I can always, you know, recapture my old relationship with this new mother or best friend or something like that.
That's what pulls her out.
That's the hardest thing for her. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
It sounds too like you've got the sort of the reverse temptation to you, where she hits the point where she realizes this has been liberation. Losing the two of them, it gut shot her, but it's actually she's growing and expanding in a way she never would have if they hadn't.
Right.
Died.
It's both at the same time. It's the most painful growth, but it's both at the same time, which is great for writing. Let me pitch something to you. So, all right. So now we got this introvert. I pitched agoraphobic. You can take that as far as you want, and I would push this character even more. Because it's genre, by the way. If we were, and this is just spitballing, this idea probably sucks. I just want to flag that. And again, I'm perfectly willing to suck because that is the only way we figure it out. But the big thing is, let's say she lives in the attic and she is alone in her world that she's created in the attic because she doesn't leave. So if that's the case, if she's stuck in that world and her mother helps her with that, you know, her mother facilitates that because she's fragile. And then in the very beginning of the story, the mother dies or is killed or whatever it is. Now she has to come out of it. And we have physical representations of it. I understand her anxiety. I understand what's going on. And now not only does she have to is she going to get out of this attic or this house, she's going to get out of this universe. And that's just an example of the extreme. What do you think of that? How's that sound? I
love that. I mean, I think that's great. I mean, currently some of the backstory that I've written is she is one of those kind of internet, like people who live within like the chat room type kind of person.
Oh, right.
You know, she's very much, she's secluded in her own mind just by, you know, living in the attic, being on the internet and not really engaging in people outside, you know?
No, that's great.
Yeah.
And so that's how you conceived her. So
let's
that's a character.
Let's talk a little bit more about your overall story arc here, because you started to introduce the bad guy and so on. So just in briefly, like what is the basic shape you see for the pilot or the series or both?
Okay, so the pilot is essentially just introducing you to the idea that there are individuals who can travel through the multiverse. And again, like it's the whole rule, if there's no one, if your double isn't in that multiverse, you can jump over. So there's people who are doing it, but very rare people like Sarah can go everywhere. So that's pretty much all we're introduced.
Let me ask quickly, how does that happen? How do you get between?
So that was, I was toying with like different fun ways to do it. For Sarah, she just naturally can do it. She closes her eyes and she finds herself in another one. But for the people who aren't gifted with her, I was trying to come up with fun ideas, like her best friend's twin. She travels in like a 1989 Ford minivan that's just got this cool machinery on it. And it just happens to be one thing that happens to exist in all of the multiverses. That single van is a consistent. And for the bad guy, I just like the idea of like a mad scientist portal in a base. Like I feel like different mechanics for different people would be kind of fun.
You know, it's interesting when you're pitching the Ford van. Like it feels like you could have a thing where there's sort of Venn diagrams where like, because of course in a real multiverse, like there'd be a shit ton of universes where Ford doesn't exist or whatever, right? But it does give her, she has access to all the slices where the Ford van exists, and different objects or different portals could give you access to other slices that may or may not overlap with the others.
Or it's not a Ford. Right. It's not a Ford in every multiverse. You're in the Ford, and when you're in the multiverse and you get out, and it's actually some other vehicle.
I guess I'm thinking there has to be universes where there are no vehicles, where there are no whatever.
Right. So she ends up on the back of a horse. Is what I'm saying.
I guess or not. It's, to me, what's interesting is you are excluded. Her best friend can't go everywhere with her because her portal does not get her to some places.
Right, and that's kind of the motivation for the best friend, because she's coming in. She's got her own mission, and part of the reason that she's coming to get Sarah is that she needs her help to get her to places that she can't go. And that's kind of
Yeah.
the
Great.
other side of it.
Yeah,
That's
that's
great.
good. And that's where the Sliders version comes in, right?
Yes.
Where
Yeah.
you have this,
Yeah.
this motley crew going, sliding through time.
All right. So I was going to say, so keep going. What's your basic story here? So what is the bad guy? What does he want?
Yeah, what's the
all
big
that stuff?
What's the big problem at the end of the pilot?
Well, okay, let me give you the season ending kind of thing. The series ending, season ending idea is that we go back to the hub, and the hub is the one singular dimension at the center of everything that is populated by singular people like Sarah. So the problem is the bad guy, the whole reason that he is going through and killing doubles, he wants to get into this hub, like the singular place where they have access to everything. So it's become it's a legendary like utopia where everything's perfect because they've seen all the possibilities. So his whole goal is to get there. And he is actually trying to get his wife, which is Sarah's mother from another spoke or dimension, into the hub with him. So the idea is he's going out and essentially murdering all of the copies of his wife because he wants to bring her to a utopia.
So I take it Sarah's father is dead because this copy of him has killed him.
I mean, that was something I was going to bury in for like other, possibilities, but she doesn't know her father. He's not in the picture, and he's kind of a mystery.
Well,
So in the pilot,
I guess I'm thinking for your bad guy's theory to work, though, right? Like he must already have made himself singular or something, right?
So he has not actually. He exists in a few different places. So part of that is to get around that. He's had to recruit other people. To the idea is like you got to get somebody else who doesn't exist to pop into a universe, kind of like clear the way. So that's kind of where the group of bad guys comes from. They're all working together, clearing the way for everybody else.
I'm just trying to figure out how he winds up on the Singularity planet if there are other copies of it.
I feel like I've slipped into Dorkville.
I'm just looking because it's a,
help me out, people.
If this is the bad guy's whole plan is that he wants to wind up on a planet where it's only for singular people, then how does he do that if there's more than one copy of him if he's not singular?
So he has. I mean, that's the whole thing. Is he has to recruit these other, this other group of bad guys who maybe don't exist in that dimension. So that you got to find like loopholes to do it, and that's kind of where the fun complication would get to. I think that's the smaller obstacles that they will reach, episode to episode.
All right, hold on. Let me jump in here before Jim
of course
goes into Nerdville. But the only value to all of this is, does it give us story in the pilot and maybe first season? We don't, all these complications, they're not going to come up in the pilot.
No, not in the pilot.
And there's probably not going to be more than a pilot because this is going to be a writing sample.
Right.
So so the simpler the story of that stuff, by the way, which can then get more and more complicated as you go, but not in the basically he is going through all the multiverses, all the universes for one thing. He just wants one thing. And just make that simple. It doesn't have to be he wants his original wife, whatever you're calling that. Right. He wants this. He's looking for somebody, and he's going to kill everybody in the way. And so I'm not proposing what that is. I don't know. I just want to keep that simple because it doesn't matter that much for the front story yet.
Well, and I'm going to go the other way with that, though, because I don't think you can build your story properly until you have a goal for him that is emotional and that is intertwined with our character, right? Like in the best world, both your bad guy and your hero want the same thing. They just have completely different visions of what it means to have that thing. The Avengers are trying to protect the universe, so is Thanos, but they have completely different visions of how you make that happen. So the question is, if what this guy wants is to somehow be the singularity, then he should want to take that from her, or there must be some way he can do that. It's something where they're,
or he has to take it from her in order to get what he wants. It's not personal,
right? Or she's trying to get her mother back, and he has this problem of every time he shows up at the same universe with some copy of her mother, she dies for some reason. He doesn't know why, and that's his missing wife and great love, right?
Or just as the best friend needs Sarah to go through the multiverse, he needs Sarah to do that too. She can get him
that
someplace,
ties them together in a meaningful way.
And that's very simple, by the way.
The idea that I wanted to end the pilot, the reason there's all that backstory, I mean, it's not going to be in the pilot, but the stinger at the end of the pilot, the final image that we see is after we know that this guy has just killed Sarah's mother and we know who she is and we think he's a bad guy. I wanted to end the pilot with him, coming out of his portal. We think he's this big mass man. He goes upstairs, and you find out that he is just a high school science teacher, and he goes into the kitchen, and his wife is there, and she's cooking dinner, and that is Sarah's mother. So I wanted to do the connection of, like, the whole thing is I wanted to set the expectation that, like, he just killed a copy of his wife. And so Sarah and him both have the same connection of this one person, Sarah's mother. Like, that's the unifying factor between the two of them. That's the one thing that is going to draw those two people with different goals together. One to, you know.
So they're both looking for the same person in a sense?
Exactly. Essentially, yeah. I mean, Sarah wants to save these copies of her mother in every dimension, whereas the masked man or the big bad guy, he wants to eliminate them.
Mm-hmm. I think that still needs to be simplified, and I don't quite understand it. And Jim and I definitely come at these things differently. I just want to say that. I would not try to figure this all out. I would write from her perspective first. Not write a script, by the way. I'm talking about on a whiteboard. I would start writing her story and be like, oh shit, moments for her that are character and plotty, and then I would adjust the backstory, adjust the world to fit that, so that then I think you'll find everything just gets simpler and simpler, because all this stuff that you're telling me is hard for me to wrap my head around. Right. And although I'm not as big of a geek about this as Jim, I am a geek about it, and it's challenging.
Yeah, and to come at it from the other way, what we usually do is go back and forth. Like we'll do bigger story, then we'll come back to characters. I think one of the challenges you're facing is it's an inherently complicated world that you're setting up.
Exactly.
It's very easy to bog down in a bunch of different rules. I think one of the reasons why Sam got confused when you're pitching the end of the pilot, there's kind of a cool, oh shit, oh Henry moment to there he is with the mom.
It's been the mom all along. Right? I got that part.
But it's confusing, because then why kill her? And I do get the hook of like, oh, I want to know why. And that works for an episode. My concern is at the end of the day, you have to understand what the giant emotional piece is that makes it make sense that he's killing copies of her in other worlds, but not the one he's living with. And that's not readily apparent. And I don't know, from what you've talked about, I'm not quite sure that it's going to be a simple emotional quest, which will help a lot. If it's just something basic and simple, all the stuff Sam's pitching about going through the characters and finding their motivations and playing with them is all great, but you have to have this fundamental rule about what's going on and what people want. When it's shaping your rules of your sci-fi universe, you need to know a couple of those pieces in order to know what to pick and choose from as you're coming up with character stuff.
In fact, I would advocate what is the dumbest circa 1950 like just simple version of this. Start there, and then you can add more rules and change what people are doing and all that. But I would go that simple, because it's not a book. In books, it's very different, because then you can explain it whatever you want. There's more time. But in TV, I got to tell you, we write genre all the time, and then we always are getting questions about the rules, and that's why sometimes Supernatural is better.
You can wave a wand, literally.
But they have to be consistent. Right. And even on Daredevil, and coincidentally, a non-necessarily supernatural show, which was that we were on, called Hand of God, which was. We talked about the rules all the damn time, and we would always be evaluating everything that everybody could do. Can Matt Murdock, Daredevil, can he hear something this far away? And the basic idea of Matt Murdock is he got poisoned with something when he was a kid. He lost his eyes, and so all his senses,
they were also heightened by the thing that took his eyes from him.
Right. So he had heightened senses. That's it. That's the rule. Heightened senses. And now fill in what you want, but it still required so much discussion in the writer's room as we were doing it, and the same thing with Hand of God. Is he hearing the voice of God, or is he making this shit up? And the question, and we had to basically, the mandate from the creator of the show was, you never know.
It's got to play either way.
That's right. So even the simple things take a lot of time. So when you have something big like that, that's where it gets tricky, and that's why I say I just need you to be a little smarter. I'm sorry. a little dumber. That's what I meant. Be a little dumber.
Two sides of the same coin.
Yeah, because explain it to me like I'm an idiot. That it's that thing, right? And that's where I get worried.
I think that's my biggest problem is I've never really approached a story from such like a big, such a high This is the first time I've tackled something with such like a high concept, like most of even when I write my other genre scripts, they're very like personal things. It's a personal story with a driven character, and they just happen to be able to talk to the dead or something weird like that. This is the first time I've approached something from like the worldview down to the character level, and that's why I've been having such a hard time with it. Is for the exact reasons that you pointed out. Is it's harder to dial into the specifics of the people when you have so much going on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think maybe you would help yourself by reverting to the way you usually approach it. Going to Sarah's point of view, which I think is part of what Sam was talking about. It's tough because you do need to know what the boundaries are of the playing field, right?
Right.
But nonetheless, there is a reason for her, and like the audience, she may not know why she's moving world to world. She may not know why her friend is there. Does she trust her? Does she believe her? It's not really her same friend. What makes her, does she find reason to question what her friend is telling her, and is it the truth?
Mm-hmm.
When you first started pitching this thing, I flashed to a British series that ABC did a remake of over a decade ago called Life on Mars.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Right? Yeah, and it's that thing. There's a world where she's not sure if she's lost her shit because of the grief she's been going through, and this is all kind of not real.
Well, you should say what Life on Mars was.
It was a cop who was injured, and now he's not sure if he's in a coma pretending he's gone back in time 30 years to 1973, and he's now a cop in London in 1973, but then he'll hear voices and fragments of stuff once in a while, like maybe he's in a hospital bed and there's people around him talking and stuff, but nonetheless, he's got crimes to solve, there's stuff going on around him, and he has to play the world as if it's real. Has he become kind of schizophrenic, or does he actually exist in a separate reality from the one he's living in?
And that's a question that Sarah could be facing, that specific one. Right, is that what you're saying, Jim? To do exactly that thing. And so it's nice. The thing that's good about that is it lets you off the hook of having to find.
It eases the burden of the rules.
Right, and it's because you're in his, or in this case, Sarah's point of view, and that may be the thing that may be the thing that can unconstipate you here.
Cool.
Because you're you're bound up on that stuff. And the thing is, this happens to us all the time, and that's when we do what Jim says is as soon as we're running out of stuff in our minds, we're not. By the way, doing story yet, when we're at this point. What is, we're on Sarah for a while. Now we're like, oh, well, what's her friend's deal? Oh, is it really your friend? Okay, now I'm writing on the whiteboard, big turn. Reveal Sarah's friend is not Sarah's friend. That's a turn. I don't know where the hell it's going to go, but I write it on the board. And then we just start laying out big reveal/turns. And now we've got, how many do we need in a pilot?
What you get, handful, 10?
No. The WGA released a form that said you need exactly this many turns. But whatever it is, maybe you need 10. Pick a number. You need certainly 5 big ones for your theoretical 5 acts, even though we haven't written in acts in a long time. But those are the big turns, and then we'll keep adding more, and some of those will fall out, not because they're not cool, but because they're not serving the character, and they're getting too complicated. But once you get those turns down, which will come with other characters, by the way, because you've only pitched 3 characters.
Right.
Sarah, best friend, and the dude.
And bad guy.
Bad guy, yeah. So what is the walking dude? So what is the thing there?
Just to throw it in before I forget, Jay, there's one other show to look at, which is Awake, which is a great Jason Isaacs show.
Very similar
on NBC.
show in some ways, but very different.
Right, where his wife died, and he finds himself, every time he closes his eyes, he wakes up in a different world. There's like 2 worlds, I believe, one where she's dead and one where she's alive.
That's right, only 2 in that version.
And is it grief that's done this to him, or is he somehow actually moving between worlds?
Right.
Cool. I like that. Yeah, I mean, I think that's going to help me a lot too. Just focusing less on like the mechanics of everything and more of the emotional story. And if she's doubting herself, it's a lot easier to move through everything without having to explain it along the way.
Right, and she doesn't trust her best. She's initially she does trust her big friend, but then the big question, best friend, and then the big question is, holy shit, is this actually someone else?
It might be easier if the best friend wasn't also dead. It might help, because then when you find out that, wait, there's something going on with the friend, and they've just moved between dimensions, like it's less, you don't have 2 dead people in your story. You've got a live person who's a question mark.
And that person's Are you saying it's the original or it's the replaced one? The one from a different multiverse? I think it's a different multiverse. So
I would say they've been replaced.
Yeah.
And then they take her to the body of the original one or something.
Yeah,
like
and by the way,
that as
she's not bad, the replaced one, but now you have a fresh relationship, right? They because of course the Sarah that woman knows, the best friend knows in the other multiverse where she's different too. So it's these two women they have the core of friendship, but they've never met each other, but they have. And now, and the reason that I'm getting excited with my brilliant idea but the reason I'm getting excited by it is, that's the core relationship. Now the core relationship is, how do these women be friends? How are they friends if they've never met? And yet they're incredibly intimate.
And does the other friend have a Sarah in her world?
Well, that's what I'm saying.
And what is she like?
Right. Yeah.
So, because she could have characteristics that our Sarah lacks or feels uncomfortable with about herself. And she's like, in some sense, really, I could be like that.
Right. And so that's now this show, and by the way, this may not be your show.
Right.
Jay, because we may have just hijacked everything. But what Jim and I are looking for is the central relationship. Right.
I think that's more compelling. Yeah.
Right. And now that I have that, you see how the multiverse stuff is starting to fade just a little bit in importance. Because now I'm writing to these two, and I'm thinking, okay, so if they meet because Sarah can go in other places, if then the best friend can meet the other Sarah, what does she think about her? I mean, there are so many.
Well, and if Sarah can go to worlds where Sarah already exists because she's singular, then what happens then?
Or does she in this version? And at some point we have to pretend that Jay's here. But but in that version, are you meeting yourself and learning things about yourself that you do not like, or are you learning things about yourself that you do like? This version of yourself did something really great, and you want to start emulating that. So this is really a show about friendship and self-discovery. And it's not about a show about there's a core group, a place where all the originals can go, and that's where which we're never going to get to.
And at the core emotional level, there's something about your identity and your mom, your parents, right? The mysteries of your own life and how you've been shaped, where you're seeing different versions of yourself. That's the sliding doors piece, right? Like where there's tremendous self-discovery and emotional content in that kind of story.
Right. Okay, Jay, your turn. How badly was
No, I mean, I love it because, I mean, again, like the show is never about the big idea. You know, it's about the emotional journey that the people go on. And that was my problem is I was like, I like this idea of a multiverse. I want to see a show where people visit different realities. But like my problem was, what does that mean? And I like the idea, as you guys were suggesting, is it makes the main characters, it forces them to be a little bit more introspective on viewing other possibilities and the other outcomes and reflecting back on themselves and, you know, them trying to figure out how they got to where they are, you know, with all of their issues or whatever, just by viewing the other possibilities. And I think I feel like that's a pretty strong narrative thread to pull. And then you just throw it against a big sci-fi backstory, you know?
Yeah, I mean, because that's the thing. There's sort of two approaches to this. I think the version we're talking about is the more sort of streamer-friendly, quote-unquote, premium version, where it's character-driven and it's about the character's emotions, versus the, you know, I don't know, sort of basic cable version where they're hopping of old, right? Like the sort of Sliders model, where it's just every week there's a different hijinks kind of caper going on because of this technology that you have access to.
Although you want every episode to be distinct about one issue so that there's some closure to each other.
It has to have some meat and some satisfaction.
So let me ask you this. Is it a good idea to approach it from that old model of like trying to figure out like a story of the week type thing? Or is it beneficial to just kind of write from a character point of view and worry more about like not having to set up the story of the week? I mean, should I it's kind of one of those things where like initially I was like, well, I want to write like an episodic thing for a sample that could be an episodic thing. But are you saying that like because of streaming, is it a better idea to just focus on writing one good pilot with great characters and, you know, a good idea?
I think the answer is yes.
Gotcha.
And I think that's just taste. You know, those sort of case of the week things they're a little less in fashion in sci-fi right now. I mean, as someone who watches almost every sci-fi or supernatural show a little bit when it comes out and some all the way, I think those are just less fashionable right now. But that doesn't mean that you shouldn't do it. Because when you really, the goal of this script is someone's going to sit down who can read it and think, you know what, Jay Richardson is great. And that asshole teacher that said that he sucked. It was 2-0 Henry. He either didn't know what he was talking about, or he was talking about some alternate Jay in a different multiverse, and that guy's not around. And I need to give this guy a job.
And by the time you get to the end of a pilot, like the whole case of the week question, you figure that out. There's no world where someone's bopping around multiverses where there's not going to be something interesting happening every week,
Right.
whether it's solely generated by her own story or because of what she's coming into contact with.
Yeah.
You can figure that out after you have a pilot that makes sense, because I don't think your pilot is going to necessarily look a lot different either way. It's a premise pilot. You almost have to demonstrate, what's going on, how the world works, how she falls into it, right?
Right.
So,
well, it's not a demonstration pilot.
I know, I
You
used
threw
that word, and I was like, well, I just tripped on the word. But I think in a way it is going to be a demonstration pilot, because I think your best version of the story is going to be her and her life and how it's impacted by this thing that she suddenly is aware of.
Well, why don't you define the premise versus demonstration?
Right. Premise pilot is where you learn how a pilot, it's the origin story pilot, right? Where this is the first time it happened, and you've never seen it before, and all the pieces are coming together. And then there's the demonstration pilot where, for example, you drop into a hospital and everyone's running around, and you're sort of meeting the doctors incidentally because they're dealing with the 3 cases of the week, and that's what's going to happen in every show from then on.
Yeah, it's demonstrating the structure of each episode of the series, whatever that is.
Gotcha.
And Jim and I wrote. Haven was really an episodic show, and then we had an Uber story that was running through the whole thing, an overarching story that ran through the whole thing, and that clearly worked. It worked for 78 episodes. So those are great, but you still, no matter what it is, you need compelling characters. You can't gloss by that. There is nobody working in television at any network that does not believe, whether it's accurate or not, that they want compelling characters in every episode of television. And even some of those shows where we're like, well, those characters are pretty much just archetypes. I can guarantee you those people who are working on that show know a lot about those characters, and maybe a lot of it's not coming out, but they're believing in them, and they know what they are.
And if your writing sample can prove that you can create characters that we believe in and attach to, they're like, oh no, we want to do this as an episodic thing where different things are happening in the multiverse. That's easy.
Yeah.
That's not hard. Everyone knows that you can supply different pieces of story on a weekly basis, because a million TV writers have done that for a million years at this point.
And I can tell you, in the writer's room, the thing that we almost never need is somebody pitching out some more plot.
Yeah.
Right.
Only because plot, it's not easy, but it's certainly a lot easy. It's easier. And plot without character is just plot. Plot plus character is story, and that's really what we're trying to get to. So people that can say, hold on, or writers that can say, hold on, doesn't our character want this right now? So wouldn't it be amazing if this happened and she or he did that? And that's gold. That's that moment where your every head swivels over to the junior writer who's sweating. We've been that guy, and you're like, and for that moment,
there's always one in every room though. Yeah. There's some junior writer just sweating, opening their mouths.
Yeah, and then they say it, and then there's that pause, and then I've been on both sides of it where you're like, nah, or the student has learned, and that is a beautiful moment when that happens to you. And I got to be honest with you, when you're responsible for coming up with the story and somebody does that in the room, you want to kiss their feet, because they have just saved you from whatever your story problem is at that particular moment.
Thank God HR prohibits that kind of activity.
So Jay, I hope we've at least pointed you in a direction, because now we get to run away while you do all the hard work.
I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to set aside the big story concept, and again, I just got to break it down and approach it like I approach everything else, and try and figure out why I'm telling Sarah's story specifically, rather than a special person story. So I think you guys have set me up with a bunch of really good ideas and a lot of character stuff, and I'm more excited to write this than I was before. So I appreciate that.
Well, that's the quote at the top of the
episode.
Jay, thanks for coming on and sharing your story with us today. It was awesome.
Cool. Thank you so much, guys. Again, I look forward to every episode.
Thanks, man.
Thanks, man. And that's all we've got for you this week. Our producer, J.R. Zamora-Thal, is working the mixing board.
Our logo was designed by Julien Debar-Monclair, and our music was provided by Bouderes out of Austin, Texas.
If you want to get in touch, we are at The Sam and Jim on Instagram and Twitter. And you can find us on Facebook and YouTube as The Writers' Room with Sam and Jim.
And if you like hanging out in the room with us, give us a follow on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts.
And tell a friend, would you, so we can get JR paid. Thanks, everyone. See you next week.